dear students, we are meeting again after a long gap. I hope you remember what I have taught in my first video. In my first class, I have discussed about the author, background and explanation of the lesson, the last lesson by Alphonse Daudet. Now let me explain the lessons in detail. The narrator of the story is a young school-going boy named Franz. He started for school very late that morning. He was afraid of being scolded because M. Hamill was to question them on participle and he did not know the first word about them. He thought of running away and spending the day out of doors. The warm bright day, the chirping birds and the Prussian soldiers drilling in the open field back of the sawmill were tempting, but he resisted the temptation and hurried off to school. While passing the town hall, there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. For the previous 2 years, all the bad news, like the lost battles, the orders of the commanding officer, etc., came from that notice board. Franz kept on walking towards the school and thought in his mind that what news could be been put up at the board now. As he walked hurriedly towards the school, the blacksmith, who was already reading the news, called out to Franz from behind and said that he needn't go in such a hurry as there was plenty of time for him to reach the school. Franz thought that the blacksmith was making fun of him because he was already late for school. When Franz reached the garden outside the school, he was out of breath and as he walked very fast. Usually when the school began, there could be heard a great noise from the street. The noise of students opening and closing of desks and the noise of repeating the lesson in unison could be heard. The noise was so great that the students had to put their hands over the ears to understand better. The teacher's ruler rapping on the table also added to this noise. But that day, everything was as silent as the Sunday morning. Through the window, Franz saw his classmates already in their places and M. Hamill walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. Franz opened the door and went in before everybody. He blushed and was frightened, but nothing bad happened to him. M. Hamill very kindly asked him to go to his place, as the class was about to begin without him. Franz quickly jumped over the bench and sat down. When he got over his fright, he noticed the teacher had come, beautifully dressed. He was wearing his beautiful green coat, the frilled shirt and the embroidered black silk cap. The teacher normally wore it on occasions like inspections and prize days. Besides, the whole atmosphere in the school was unusual and serious. But the most surprising thing was the presence of the old villagers who were sitting silently on the benches. Among them, there was old Hauser wearing his three-cornered hat, the former mayor, the former postmaster, and several others beside them. They all looked sad. Hauser had brought a primer which was old and torn. He had opened it, kept it on his knees, and had placed his spectacles on it. While Franz was wondering what might be the matter, the teacher mounted his chair. In a very grave tone, he addressed the children and said that he was going to give the last lesson in French. He said that the order had come from Berlin that only German would be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. He declared that the new teacher would come on the following day. He begged the students to be attentive and take the last lesson in French. Franz was shocked to know that he could not learn French any longer, and now he knew the latest news that had been put up at the bulletin board of the town hall. Franz was amazed to know about the last lesson in French. He was sorry that he would not get scope to learn the language anymore. He regretted for not being serious towards studies and for wasting his time in seeking bird's egg and sliding on the Sir River. His books, the grammar, the history of the saints, which he had been treating as burden, seemed to be his old friends. The news that the teacher, M. Hamill, was leaving and that he would no longer see him made him forget the punishment he gave to the students. Now Franz realized why the teacher was in his best dress and why the old men of the village were sitting on the back benches in the classroom. The village men were also sorry for their negligence towards learning their lessons. It was their way of thanking the teacher who had given 40 years of faithful service. Also, they wanted to show respect to their country, which had been occupied by the Germans. The teacher calls out to Franz as it was his turn to recite. He hoped to recite the rules of participles without any mistake, but he could not. He got mixed up in the very first word and stood there holding the decks, his heart beating and not daring to look up. M. Hamill said to Franz that he would not scold him as now he had realized his mistake. Every day, Franz told himself that he would study the next day, and now the opportunity to study had ended and he knew nothing. M. Hamill says that all the people of Alsace were to be blamed as no one was serious towards learning. He tells the class that the Prussians would laugh at them and say that they only show to be Frenchmen as they can neither speak nor write their own language. He says that France should not feel guilty as everyone is at fault. Then the teacher blamed the parents of the students. M. Hamill says that Franz's parents were not interested in getting him educated. They wanted him to work at a farm or a mill in order to earn some money. He says that as a teacher, he was also not interested in teaching them. He would send them to his home to water the plants. Sometimes he would declare a holiday and go for fishing. Then from one thing to the other, M. Hamill went on to praise the French language as being the most beautiful, clearest, the most logical language in the world. He tells the class to guard their language as it is the only way to free oneself from the prisons of slavery. If a person knows his mother tongue well, no one can enslave him. Knowing the mother tongue well as a language is a tool to fight domination. Then the teacher taught some lessons from grammar. That day, Franz was surprised that he understood the lesson very well. What the teacher said. He listened carefully and eagerly, which he had never done before. The teacher explained everything very clearly and patiently. It seemed as if he would teach everything in one single stroke. After the grammar, they had a lesson in writing. M. Hamill gave them new copies with France, Alsace, beautifully written on them. Franz felt here was an air of patriotism in the class. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the classroom. It was very calm and quiet. The entire class was busy writing, and the only sound could be heard was that of the scratching of pens on the paper. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention. Even the youngest children were busy tracing their fish hooks. It seemed as if the fish hooks too were friends. On the roof, the pigeons were heard cooing very low. Franz wondered whether the German would be able to make the pigeon sing in German. Whenever Franz looked up from his writing, he saw M. Hamill wondering at everything in the classroom. He was sitting motionless and was probably looking at things one after another. Hamill had been teaching in that school for the last 40 years. He was familiar with everything in and outside the classroom. The desks and the benches had worn out due to use over the years, and the trees and plants that he had planted himself grew taller. Franz, Franz feels that the teacher must be heartbroken to leave all such dear things. His sister was heard moving about in the room above. She was packing the things, for they must leave the country on the following day. M. Hamill had the courage to listen every lesson to the last. After the writing, they had a lesson in history. The babies were heard chanting ba bee bee boo boo. At the back of the room, old Hauser, wearing his spectacles and holding the primer in both his hands, recited the letters with the class. He was crying. His voice trembled as he spoke. Franz had mixed feelings. He found it funny to see how an old man like Hauser was crying and trembling, and on the other hand, he also felt emotional like Hauser did. Franz remembers very well the day of the last lesson. All at once, the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus was heard. At the same moment, the sound of the trumpets played by the Prussian soldiers who were returning from the drill was heard. M. Hamill's face became dull and colorless as the time had come for the class to get over. He stood straight and motionless, and Franz says that he had never appeared so tall. Then he addressed the students as his friends and stammered to say something, but something choked his voice and could not continue as he was overpowered by his emotions. He took a piece of chalk and wrote the words Vive la France, meaning Long live France, on the blackboard as last as he could. Then he stopped writing, bent towards the wall, and without speaking anything, signaled the class to leave as the class was over. So this chapter ends here. Thank you.